guys, I am Cody Russell. I am an Atlanta artist, and today for story time, we're going to be going over some selections from Tales of Beedle the Bard, which are wizarding fairy tales from the Harry Potter universe. So we're going to get started. I want to save the most famous one, the tale of the Peverell brothers, for last. So for starters, I think we'll get started with The Fountain of Fair Fortune. The Fountain of Fair Fortune. High on a hill in an enchanted garden, enclosed by tall walls and protected by strong magic, flowed the Fountain of Fair Fortune. Once a year, between the hours of sunrise and sunset on the longest day, a single unfortunate was given the chance to fight their way to the fountain, bathe in its waters, and receive fair fortune forevermore. On the appointed day, hundreds of people traveled from all over the kingdom to reach the garden walls before dawn. Rich and poor, young and old, of magical means and without. They gathered in the darkness, each hoping that they would be the one to gain entrance to the garden. 3 witches, each with her burden of woe, met on the outskirts of the crowd and told one another their sorrows as they waited for sunrise. The first, by name Asha, was sick of a malady no healer could cure. She hoped that the fountain would banish her symptoms and grant her a long and happy life. The second, by name Altheda, had been robbed of her home, her gold, and her wand by an evil sorcerer. She hoped that the fountain might relieve her of her powerlessness and poverty. The third, by name of Amata, had been deserted by a man whom she loved dearly, and she thought her heart would never mend. She hoped that the fountain would relieve her of her grief and longing. Pitying each other, the 3 women agreed that, should the chance befall them, they would unite and try to reach the fountain together. The sky was rent with the first ray of sun, and a chink in the wall opened. The crowd surged forward, each of them shrieking their claim for the fountain's benison. Creepers from the garden beyond snaked through the pressing mass and twisted themselves around the first witch, Asha. She grasped the wrist of the second witch, Altheda, who seized tight upon the robes of the third witch, Amata. And Amata became caught upon the armor of a dismal-looking knight who was seated on a bone-thin horse. The creepers tugged the 3 witches through the chink in the wall, and the knight was dragged off his steed after them. The furious screams of the disappointed throng rose upon the morning air and then fell silent as the garden wall sealed once more. Asha and Altheda were angry with Amata, who had accidentally brought along the knight. "Only one can bathe in the fountain. It will be hard enough to decide which of us it will be without adding another." Now, Sir Luckless, as the knight was known in the land outside the walls, observed that these were witches, and having no magic nor any great skill at jousting or dueling with swords, nor anything that distinguished the non-magical man, was sure that he had no hope of beating the 3 women to the fountain. He therefore declared his intention of withdrawing outside the walls again. At this, Amata became angry too. "Faint heart," she chided him. "Draw your sword, knight, and help us reach our goal." And so the 3 witches and the forlorn knight ventured forth into the enchanted garden, where rare herbs, fruit, and flowers grew in abundance on either side of the sunlit paths. They met no obstacle until they reached the foot of the hill on which the fountain stood. There, however, wrapped around the base of the hill, was a monstrous white worm, bloated and blind. At their approach, it turned a foul face upon them and uttered the following words: "Pay me the proof of your pain." Sir Luckless drew his sword and attempted to kill the beast, but his blade snapped. Then Altheda cast rocks at the worm, while Asha and Amata essayed every spell that might subdue or entrance it. But the power of their wands was no more effective than their friends' stones or the knight's steel. The worm would not let them pass. The sun rose higher and higher in the sky, and Asha, despairing, began to weep. Then the great worm placed its face upon hers and drank the tears from her cheeks. Its thirst assuaged, the worm slithered aside and vanished into a hole in the ground. Rejoicing at the worm's disappearance, the three witches and the knight began to climb the hill, sure that they would reach the fountain before noon. Halfway up the steep slope, however, they came across words cut into the ground before them. "Pay me the fruit of your labors." Sir Luckless took out his only coin and placed it upon the grassy hillside, but it rolled away and was lost. The three witches and the knight continued to climb, but though they walked for hours more, they advanced not a step. The summit came no nearer, and still the inscription lay in the earth before them. All were discouraged as the sun rose over their heads and began to sink toward the far horizon, but Althea walked faster and harder than any of them, and exhorted the others to follow her example, though she moved no further up the enchanted hill. "Courage, friends, and do not yield," she cried, wiping the sweat from her brow. As the drops fell, glittering unto the earth, the inscription blocking their path vanished, and they found that they were able to move upward once more. Delighted by the removal of the second obstacle, they hurried toward the summit as fast as they could, until at last they glimpsed the fountain, glittering like crystal in a bower of flowers and trees. But before they could reach it, however, they came to a stream that ran atop the hilltop, barring their way. In the depths of the clear water lay smooth stone bearing the words, "Pay me the treasure of your past." Sir Luckless attempted to float across the stream in his shield, but it sank. The three witches pulled him from the water, then tried to leap the brook themselves, but it would not let them cross. And all the while the sun was sinking lower in the sky. They fell to pondering the meaning of the stone's message, and Amata was the first to understand. Taking her wand, she drew from her mind all the memories of happy times she had spent with her vanished lover, and dropped them into the rushing waters. The stream swept them away, and stepping stones appeared, and the three witches and the knight were able to pass at last onto the summit of the hill. The fountain shimmered before them, set amidst herbs and flowers rarer and more beautiful than any they had ever seen. The sky burned ruby, and it was time to decide which of them would bathe. Before they could make their decision, however, frail Asha fell to the ground. Exhausted by their struggle to the summit, she was close to death. Her three friends would have carried her to the fountain, but Asha was in mortal agony and begged them not to touch her. Then Althea hastened to pick all those herbs she thought most helpful and mixed them in Sir Luckless's gourd of water and poured the potion into Asha's mouth. At once, Asha was able to stand. What was more, all symptoms of her dread malady had vanished. "I am cured," she cried. "I have no need for the fountain. Let Althea bathe." But Althea was busy collecting more herbs in her apron. "If I can cure this disease, I shall earn gold aplenty. Let Amata bathe." Sir Luckless bowed and gestured Amata toward the fountain, but she shook her head. The stream had washed away all regret for her lover, and she saw now that he had been cruel and faithless, and it was happiness enough to be rid of him. "Good sir, you must bathe as a reward for all your chivalry," she told Sir Luckless. So the knight clanked forth in the last rays of the setting sun and bathed in the fountain of fair fortune, astonished that he was chosen one of hundreds and giddy with his incredible luck. As the sun fell below the horizon, Sir Luckless emerged from the waters with the glory of his triumph upon him and flung himself in his rusted armor at the feet of Amata, who was the kindest and most beautiful woman he had ever beheld. Flushed with success, he begged for her hand and her heart, and Amata, no less delighted, realized that she had found a man worthy of them. The three witches and the knight set off down the hill together, arm in arm, and all four led long and happy lives, and none of them ever knew or suspected the waters carried no enchantment at all. What's really cool about this book, you did not ask for a commentary, and that did not stop me, is that at the end of every short story, there's a little blurb from Albus Dumbledore, who kept this copy of his book. And so I'm going to read what Albus has to say about this. The Fountain of Fair Fortune is a perennial favorite, so much so that it was the subject of the sole attempt to introduce a Christmas pantomime to Hogwarts' festive celebrations Our then herbology master, Professor Herbert Beery, an enthusiastic devotee of amateur dramatics, proposed an adaptation of this well-beloved children's tale as a Yuletide treat for staff and students. I was then a young Transfiguration teacher, and Herbert assigned me to special effects, which included providing a fully functioning fountain of fair fortune and a miniature grassy hill up which our three heroines and hero would appear to march while it sank slowly into the stage and out of sight. I think I may say without vanity that both my fountain and my hill performed their parts allotted to them with simple goodwill. Alas, the same could not be said of the rest of the cast. Ignoring for a moment the antics of the gigantic worm provided by our Care of Magical Creatures teacher, Professor Sylvanus Kettleburn, the human element proved disastrous to the show. Professor Beery, in his role of director, had been dangerous oblivious to the emotional entanglements seething under his very nose. Little did he know that the students playing Amata and Sir Luckless had been boyfriend and girlfriend until 1 hour before the curtain rose, at which point Sir Luckless transferred his affections to Asha. Suffice it to say that our seekers after fair fortune never made it to the top of the hill. The curtain had barely risen when Professor Kettleburn's worm, now revealed to be an ashwinder with an engorgement charm upon with it, exploded in a shower of hot sparks and dust, filling the great hall with smoke and fragments of scenery. Ashwinders are a snake made up of fire, and when they lay eggs somewhere, it often catches fire to the whole building. A simple freezing charm would subdue it, but I suppose we didn't do that. Also, you should never catch an engorgement charm on an ashwinder. That's just dangerous. While the enormous fiery eggs that had laid at the foot of the hill ignited the floorboards, Amata and Asha turned upon each other, dueling so fiercely that Professor Beery was caught in the crossfire, and the staff had to evacuate the hall as the inferno, now raging on stage, threatened to engulf the place. The night's entertainment concluded with a packed hospital ring. It was several months before the great hall lost its pungent aroma of wood smoke, and even longer before Professor Beery's head resumed its normal proportions, and Professor Kettleburn was taken off probation. Little known fact, Professor Kettleburn was put on and off probation many, many times during his tenure at Hogwarts. Headmaster Armando Dippet imposed a blanket ban on future pantomimes, a proud, non-theatrical tradition that Hogwarts continues to this day. Our dramatic fiasco notwithstanding, The Fountain of Fair Fortune is probably the most popular of Beedle's tales, although just like The Wizard and the Hopping Pot, it has its detractors. I think for the next one, I shall read The Wizard and the Hopping Pot. It is another favorite of mine. Ooh. Okay. The Wizard and the Hopping Pot. There was once a kindly old wizard who used his magic generously and wisely for the benefit of his neighbors. Rather than reveal the true source of his power, he pretended that his potions, charms, and antidotes sprang ready-made from the little cauldron he called his lucky cooking pot. From miles around, people came to him with their troubles, and the wizard was pleased to give his pot a stir and put things right. This well-beloved wizard lived to a goodly age, then died, leaving all his chattels to his only son. This son was of a very different disposition to his gentle father. Those who could not work magic were, to the son's mind, worthless, and he had often quarreled with his father's habits of dispensing magical aid to their neighbors. Upon the father's death, the son found hidden inside the old cooking pot a small package bearing his name. He opened it, hoping for gold, but found instead a soft, thick slipper, much too small to wear, and with no pair. A fragment of parchment within the slipper bore the words, "In the fond hope, my son, that you will never need it." The son cursed his father's age-softened mind, then threw the slipper back into the cauldron, resolving it to use it henceforth as a rubbish pail. That very night, a peasant woman knocked on the front door. "My granddaughter is afflicted by a crop of warts, sir," she told him. "Your father used to mix a special poultice in that cooking pot." "Begone," cried the son. "What care I for your brat's warts?" And he slammed the door in the old woman's face. At once, there came a loud clanging and banging from the kitchen. The wizard lit his wand and opened the door, and there, to his amazement, he saw his father's old cooking pot. It had sprouted a single foot of brass and was hopping on the spot in the middle of the floor, making a fearful noise upon the flagstones. The wizard approached it in wonder, but fell back hurriedly when he saw that the whole of the pot's surface was covered in warts. "Disgusting object!" he cried, and he tried firstly to vanish the pot, then to clean it by magic. You would use Scourgify, the scouring charm, to clean such a thing. And finally, to force it out of the house. None of his spells worked, however, and he was unable to prevent the hopping pot after him out of the kitchen and then following him up to the bed, clanging and banging loudly on every wooden stair. The wizard could not sleep at all for the banging of the warty old pot by his bedside. And next morning the pot insisted upon hopping after him to the breakfast table. Clang, clang, clang went the brass-footed pot, and the wizard had not even started his porridge when there came another knock on the door. An old man stood at the doorstep. "'Tis my old donkey, sir," he explained. "Lost she is, or stolen, and without her I cannot take my wares to the market, and my family will go hungry tonight." "And I am hungry now," roared the wizard, and he slammed the door in the old man's face. Clang, clang, clang went the cooking pot's single brass foot upon the floor, but now its clamor was mixed with the brays of a donkey and human groans of hunger echoing from the depths of the pot. "Be still, be silent," shrieked the wizard, but not all his magical powers could quiet the warty pot, which hopped at its heels all day, braying and groaning and clanging no matter where he went or what he did. The evening there came a third knock upon the door, and there on the threshold stood a young woman, sobbing as though her heart would break. "My baby is grievously ill," she said. "Won't you please help us? Your father bade me come if troubled," but the wizard slammed the door on her. And now the tormenting pot filled to the brim with salt water and slopped tears all over the floor as it hopped and brayed and groaned and sprouted more warts. Though no more villagers came to seek help at the wizard's cottage for the rest of the week, the pot kept him informed of their many ills. Within a few days, it was not only braying and groaning and slopping and hopping and sprouting warts, it was also choking and retching, crying like a baby, whining like a dog, and spewing out bad cheese and sour milk and a plague of hungry slugs. The wizard could not sleep or eat with the pot beside him, but the pot refused to leave, and he could not silence it or force it to be still. At last, the wizard could bear it no more. "Bring me all your problems, all your troubles, and your woes," he screamed, fleeing out into the night, and with the pot hopping behind him along the road in the village. "Come, let me cure you, mend you, and comfort you. I have my father's cooking pot, and I shall make you well." And with the foul pot still bounding along behind him, he ran up the street, casting spells in every direction. Inside one house, the little girl's warts vanished as she slept. The lost donkey was summoned from a distant briar patch and set down softly in its stables. The sick baby was doused in dittany and woke well and rosy. At every house of sickness and sorrow, the wizard did his best. And gradually, the cooking pot beside him stopped groaning and retching and became quiet, shiny, and clean. "Well, pot?" asked the trembling wizard as the sun began to rise. The pot burped out the single slipper he had thrown into it and permitted him to fit it onto the brass foot. Together, they set off back to the wizard's house. The pot's footsteps muffled at last, but from that day forward, the wizard helped the villagers, like his father before him, lest the pot cast off its slipper and begin to hop once more. Interesting side note. So Beedle, the bard, was a big fan of relations between wizards and non-wizards and magical and non-magical folk. But there was a time when that sentiment was not relayed further. So there's another version of this story that instead of teaching the young wizard a lesson that he needs to love and care for his neighbors as best as he can, instead it talks about how the hopping pot comes and swallows up the bad melodies and just lets it go about. So I'm glad that the original copy is what made it into Tales of Beedle the Bard in the published version. I think, to close out, we're going to do the most famous of the tales and do the tale of the three brothers. There were once three brothers who were traveling along a lonely, winding road at twilight. Mrs. Weasley would have said midnight. In time, the brothers reached a river too deep to wade through and too dangerous to swim across. However, these brothers were learned in the magical arts, and so they simply waved their wands and made a bridge appear across the treacherous water. They were halfway across it when they found their path blocked by a hooded figure. And Death spoke to them. He was angry that they had been cheated out of 3 new victims for travelers usually drowned in the river. But Death was cunning. He pretended to congratulate the 3 brothers upon their magic and said that each had earned a prize for having been clever enough to evade him. So the oldest brother, who was a combative man, asked for a wand more powerful than any in existence. A wand that must always win duels for its owner, a wand worthy of a wizard who had conquered death. So Death crossed to an elder tree on the banks of the river, fashioned a wand from a branch that hung there, and gave it to the oldest brother. Little side note, wands always have some kind of a magic core. So like Harry's wand has a magic phoenix feather from Fox, but also wand makers sometimes use Vela hair, although it's a little bit temperamental. Ollivander uses phoenix feathers, dragon heartstring, and unicorn hair, and the Elder Wand uses a single strand of hair from a thestral mane. The second brother, who was an arrogant man, decided that he wanted to humiliate Death even further and asked for the power to recall others from death. So Death picked up a stone from the riverbank and gave it to the second brother and told him that the stone would have the power to bring back the dead. And then Death asked the third and youngest brother what he would like. The youngest siblings are sometimes the best. The youngest brother was the humblest and also the wisest of the brothers, and he did not trust Death. So he asked for something that would enable him to go further forth from that place without being followed by Death, and Death most unwillingly handed over his own cloak of invisibility. Then Death stood aside and allowed the 3 brothers to continue on their way. And they did so, talking with wonder of the adventure they had had and admiring Death's gifts. In due course, the brothers separated, each for his own destination. The first brother traveled on for a week or more, and reaching a distant village, sought out a fellow wizard with whom he had a quarrel. Naturally, with the Elder Wand as his weapon, he could not fail to win the duel that followed. Leaving his enemy upon the floor, the oldest brother proceeded to an inn, where he boasted loudly of the powerful wand that he had snatched from Death himself, and how it made him invincible. That very night, another wizard crept upon the oldest as he lay upon his bed, and the thief took the wand. And so, eventually, Death took the first brother for his own. Meanwhile, the second brother journeyed to his own home, where he lived alone. Here he took out the stone that had the power to recall the dead and turned it thrice in his hand. To his amazement and to his delight, the figure of the girl he had once hoped to marry before her untimely death appeared at once before him. Yet she was sad and cold, separated from him by a veil. Though she had returned to the mortal world, she did not truly belong there, and suffered. Finally, the second brother, driven mad with hopeless longing, and so Death took the second brother for his own. But though Death searched for the third brother for many years, he was never able to find him. It was only when he attained a great age that the youngest brother finally took off the cloak of invisibility and gave it to his son. And then he greeted Death as an old friend, and went with him gladly, and as equals, they departed this life. I like to rattle on, so I know I've been going on for a little while, so I'm going to conclude by reading Albus Dumbledore's notes on this last tale. Albus Dumbledore on The Tale of the Three Brothers. This story made a profound impression on me as a boy. I heard it first from my mother, and it soon became the tale I requested more often than any other bedtime. This frequently led to arguments with my younger brother Aberforth, whose favorite story was Grumble the Grubby Goat. The moral of the tale of the three brothers could not be any clearer. Human efforts to evade or overcome death are always doomed to disappointment. The third brother in the story, the humblest and also the wisest, is the only one who understands that, having narrowly escaped once, the best he can hope for is to postpone their next meeting for as long as possible. The youngest brother knows that taunting death by engaging in violence like the first brother, or by meddling in the shadowy art of necromancy like the second brother, means pitting oneself against a wily enemy who cannot lose. The irony is that the curious legend has grown up around this story, which precisely contradicts the message of the original. This legend holds that if the gifts that death gives the brothers, an unbeatable wand, a stone that can bring back the dead, and an invisibility cloak that endures forever, are genuine objects that exist in the real world. The legend goes further. If any person becomes the rightful owner of all three, then he or she shall become the master of death, which has usually been understood to mean that they will be invulnerable or even immortal. We may smile a little sadly at what this tells us about the human nature. The kindest interpretation would be, hope springs eternal. In spite of that fact, according to Beedle, 2 of the 3 objects are highly dangerous. In spite of the clear message that death comes for us all in the end, a tiny minority of the wizarding community persists in believing that Beedle was sending them a coded message, which is the exact reverse of the one set down in ink, and that they alone are clever enough to understand it. Their theory, or perhaps desperate hope, might be a more accurate term, is supported by little actual evidence. True invisibility cloaks, though rare, exist in this world of ours. However, this story makes it clear that Death's cloak is of a uniquely durable nature. Though all the centuries have been intervened between Beedle's day and our own, nobody has ever claimed to have found Death's cloak. This is explained away by true believers thus. Either the third brother's descendants do not know where the cloak came from, or they know and are determined to show their ancestors' wisdom by not tempting the fact. Naturally enough, the stone has never been found either. As I have already noted in the commentary for Babbity Rabbity and her cackling stump, we can do that one again later. We remain incapable of raising the dead, and there is every reason to suppose that this will never happen. Vile substitutions have, of course, been attempted by dark wizards who have created Inferi, but these are ghastly puppets, not truly reawakened humans. What is more, Beedle's story is quite explicit about the fact that the second brother's lost love has not really returned from the dead. She has been sent by death to lure the second brother into death's clutches, and therefore is cold, remote, both present and absent. This leaves us with the wand, and here the obstinate believers in Beedle's hidden message have at least some historical evidence to back up their wild claims, for it is the case, whether because they like to glorify themselves or to intimidate possible attackers, or because they truly believed what they were saying, that wizards down the ages have claimed to possess a wand more powerful than the ordinary, even an unbeatable wand. Some of these wizards have gone so far as to claim that their wand is made of elder, like the wand supposedly made by death. Such wands have been given many names, among them the Wand of Destiny and others. It is hardly surprising that old superstitions have grown up around the wands, which are, after all, our most important magical tools and weapons. Certain wands, and therefore their owners, are supposed to be incompatible. When his wand's oak and hers is holly, then to marry would be folly, is an old wizard tale to say. Or to denote flaws in the owner's character. Rowan gossips, chestnut drones, ash is stubborn, hazel moans. And sure enough, within this category of unproven sayings we find, wand of elder, never prosper. Whether because of the fact that death makes the fictional wand out of elder and Beedle story, or because power-hungry or violent wizards have persistently claimed that their own wands are made of elder, it is not a wood that is much favored among wand makers. The first well-documented mention of a wand made of elder that had a particularly strong and dangerous powers were earned by Emmerich, commonly called the Evil, a short-lived but exceptionally aggressive wizard who terrorized the south of England in the early Middle Ages. He died as he had lived, in a ferocious duel with a wizard known as Egbert. What became of Egbert is unbeknown, although the life expectancy of medieval duelers was generally short. In the days before there was a ministry of magic to regulate the use of dark magic, dueling was usually unkind. A full century later, another unpleasant character, this time made Godalot, advanced the study of dark magic by writing a collection of dangerous spells with the help of a wand he described in his notebook as my most wicked and subtle friend, who knows ways of magic most powerful. And that then became his book's masterwork. As can be seen, Godalot considers his wand to be very powerful, almost an instructor. Those who are knowledgeable about wand lore, those of us who are knowledgeable about wand lore, will agree that wands do indeed absorb the expertise of those who use them. Though this is an unpredictable and imperfect business, one must consider all kinds of additional factors, such as the relationship between the wand and the user, to understand how well it is likely to perform with any particular individual. Nevertheless, a hypothetical wand that had passed through the hands of many dark wizards would be likely to have, at the very least, a marked affinity for the most dangerous kinds of magic. Most witches and wizards prefer a wand that has chosen them, any kind of second-hand wand, precisely because of the latter is likely to have learned habits from its previous owner that might not be compatible with the new owner's style of magic. The general practice of buying or burning the wand with its owner, once he or she has passed, also tends to prevent any individual wand from learning from too many masters. Believers in the Elder Wand, however, hold that because of the way in which it has always passed allegiance between owner to owner, the next master overcoming the first, usually by disarming them, the Elder Wand has never been destroyed or buried, but has survived to accumulate wisdom, strength, and power far beyond the ordinary. Thank you guys so much for joining us today, and I hope that you have many magical dreams, and if you want to catch some more Tales of Beedle the Bard, maybe I'll pop on another day and go over some of my other favorites like Babbity Rabbity and Her Cackling Stump, or The Wizard and the Hairy Heart. There's a lot of really good ones in here. Bye, guys!